So welcome everybody. I'm Dan Mortensen. I'm the current chair of the Pacific Northwest section. And I appreciate that everyone is using your real names, so we don't need to get into that. Our next meeting of the section is going to be on November 23rd, and that'll be James D. J.J. Johnston talking about building a room for immersive mixing. And that will be a hybrid meeting, meaning that we'll do it both in person at DigiPen in Redmond, Washington, and on Zoom. So if you want to be part of that, you can read about it soon on our new webpage. And I'm assuming everybody knows that we have moved our homepage from someplace. If there's anybody who isn't, please speak up and we'll send you the link. But I assume you know already where it is. The Zephy for the November meeting is already up if you want to get tickets for that. And speaking of Zephy, we've raised over $40 for this meeting, which may not seem like much, but combined with the income from our other meetings, we're self-sustaining and have been for a few years now, which is a pretty remarkable thing. We're not taking money from the AES. And I was going to go into this longer, but since it's a small group today, I'm just going to say that we are in a very strange moment in American history right now. And if it goes the wrong way, it's going to have a significant impact on many more subtle things, like our interest in audio engineering and the scientific truth of it. At some point, I'll post later in the meeting some links from a couple of videos that I've seen recently that were significant to me. And I'll leave it at that. But be sure to vote, please, because this is a real important thing. Finally, and this is the most you'll hear from me tonight probably, is Jess and Gary are going to do the heavy lifting for the most part. The idea for this meeting came up for two reasons. One, our section almost always has a convention wrap up at our fall meetings to hear from our members who went to the convention and to see and hear what they choose to share with us. That's usually a smaller part of a larger meeting. In this case, our planned October meeting fell through at almost the last minute, and I proposed that we expand on the subject since Gary and I were kind of involved in a big way in a small part of the convention. And he would have time to be able to wander around and take pictures and movies of much of the rest of it. And since we could do this meeting on Zoom, which was a bonus since I'm still in New York City on vacation, and that picture behind me is the view out the window of the place I'm staying this afternoon. So that plus Jess Berg, our vice chair, who will be the primary moderator tonight, is in Minnesota and Gary's in Seattle. So the Zoom thing works out great. And it's extremely important for us to state that none of us has any significant insight into the whys or wherefores of what we saw and experienced about this or any other convention, past or future. For the record, I was on the planning committee for a couple of conventions as track chair or functional chair, but those committees are subject focused and not involved in the larger planning or policies. And while Gary, our section secretary for around 30 years, is coincidentally the AES teller running the AES international elections, and in that role, he's had to sign various NDAs, non-disclosure agreements about the inner workings of the society. He will not disclose anything that he didn't see or hear in his role as a regular convention attendee or that he read about in the journal or other audio publications. So let me now introduce our moderator for tonight, Jess Berg, who will do her self-introduction as an example to you of how to do those things. Jess?
Thank you, Dan, and welcome everyone to tonight. We're here to not only discuss the most recent convention, but celebrate the history and look towards the future. I am Jess Berg, current vice chair of the Pacific Northwest section, and I come from, I should preface this, as soon as I introduce tonight's agenda and myself, I'm going to ask everyone to take a couple moments and introduce themselves so that we know everyone in the room as we open our discussion throughout the evening and the flow. So I come from a live sound and touring background. I was in the live concert sound world for about 20 years and recently got recruited into broadcast audio, where I'm currently the technical supervisor at Minnesota Public Radio. I was out on the West Coast for a while from Minnesota. Now I'm back thanks to COVID. But I'm really excited about this mid-career pivot and really thrilled that I can still be a participant in this section. It's meant a lot to me throughout the years. So tonight I'm very excited to share and a little humbled because I have to be honest, I have not attended the convention. And so when this discussion came up with Dan and Gary, I brought the perspective of somebody who was convention curious and had always wanted to attend, but for whatever reason, it hadn't aligned. And I'm still, it's on my list and priority to be able to attend. And so it helped.
Maybe San Diego.
Perhaps, but I'm now based in St. Paul, Minnesota. So,
Oh, right.
yep, but we'll see. You never know. So as far as tonight goes, we will follow a bit of a flow, or try to anyways. After our introductions, we'll introduce Gary to share a bit of his perspective on the history. And also, we will go and take a video tour of the exhibit floor from this year, which is very exciting. And during that tour, I encourage everyone to unmute if you want to share. If you see something you recognize, you see somebody you recognize, feel free to speak up. It'll be a open discussion at that point, and just from there, after our video tours, we'll invite everyone who attended this year to share a bit of their perspective and experiences as well. And one thing we want to try, and I'll share it now, is when we get to that point of sharing our stories and our experiences with the convention, whether it's current or past, I am going to use a timer. It's going to be 3 minutes. It's going to look like this. I'll just share so everyone knows, just so that we can make sure to get to everyone in a timely way. And so think about, how to make maximum impact in 3 minutes. And at the very end of tonight's evening, we will have an open discussion. So feel free to, share more at that time. Once we talk about the current convention, we'll mention kind of what we know about the future, and then we'll get into our experiences in the past, where Dan will also share a bit of his oral history project experiences, and we'll dive a bit deeper into memories. So one very important disclaimer I want to say, and I want to make sure to get it right, is that this is unofficial. Okay, we don't have any real insider info. As Dan mentioned, this is very much us as AES members or participants in some way, supporters who care about what the convention is, what it has been in the past, and where it could possibly go from here. For those who might not be familiar, AES convention did start in the late 40s, and it used to be a place, one of the only places where everyone in the industry would be able to come together and move the needle forward. Committee business would happen at these conventions, where new standards were made for international trade and, pushing the technology forward throughout the industry at all levels. And that still happens to a degree, but when we were able to meet over the internet and do a lot more things digitally, things definitely shifted, and we'll get into that a bit more. So without further ado, let's do an introduction of everyone. If you just want to share a bit about your background, where you're at, where you're in your affiliation with AES, that would be great. And I'd like to start with Alan Torres, if I pronounced your name. Thanks.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Torres. Moved to Seattle about 3 years ago, so I'm fairly new to the area. Professionally, I don't work in the audio industry. I work as a computer systems engineer, but I've been a huge lover of everything audio for, since I can remember myself, and so I love following, everything that AES does. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for being here. Rob Mayer. If you're there, Rob, you can unmute and share a bit about yourself. If you can't unmute, feel free to pop it in the chat. And yes, Bob Smith, thank you. Please include if you're a current AES member, we would like to get an AES count who's present. So if Gary could maybe note that, we'll try to keep track as we go here. Thank you. So Rob, last call or pop it in the chat. All right, Mark Gander. If you could unmute and share a bit about yourself. All right, going once. All right, Mark may have stepped away. We'll encourage folks to share the intros in the chat as well. Wayne Edwards, if you're there, please unmute and share. Hello.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Guess I'm here this time. Let's see. Audio profession, I've done some live sound, I've done some location recording, a little bit of installs, and that's about it. I am an AES member.
Great. Thank you for being here. Michael Ashton.
All right. Apologies if there's some noise. I'm an AES member. I'm on the Pacific Northwest Committee. What else can I say about myself? I don't. My day job is not specifically in audio, but I am starting a company to make some audio products. So, that's about it, I guess.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Vev, welcome. Nice to see you. Oh, I think can't hear your mic. We didn't do a sound check. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, just turned on my mic again. Yeah. Hi everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm Vaibhav from New Delhi, India. I'm a recording and mixing engineer focusing on immersive audio, and I am an AES member as well.
Great. Thank you. Matthew Sutton.
Hi, I'm Matthew Sutton. I am an AES member. I repair electronics devices for musicians and studios and high-end hi-fi, which is what I'm currently doing in the background while listening to this meeting.
Awesome. Thank you. Paul Keller.
Hi, I'm Paul Keller, AES Life member, and out of the Philadelphia area. Spent most of my career in broadcasting with a stint in with a broadcast equipment manufacturer doing the test equipment, and I've been on different standards groups and done remote recording with Bill Gellhouse.
Very cool. Thanks for being here. Brad McCoy.
Hi, Jess. Thank you. I think I may have met you at the ARS conference at the Minnesota Public Radio tour during the ARS conference. Is that right?
Could have been. Yes. Yeah.
In May.
Cool.
Anyway, nice to see you again, and so many others here. Yeah, I'm definitely an AES member. And I think I have been for a while, but when I look around the screen, there's some folks who've been an AES member for a long time, and it's great to see the life members. So I've been in the archiving field for a long time, was involved with the AES archiving conferences in Culpeper at the Library of Congress, where I worked for 39 years, and I'm now retired. but still active in the field. And it's a real pleasure to be involved here. I'm in the historical committee with Dan and Bill and John and Gary and a lot of others. So it's really an honor to be a leader of that group.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Bill Levy.
Hello. I'm an AES member. I am located in Edmonds, Washington. I do location recording, local orchestras, classical music groups. I've been to a couple of conventions, but only on the West Coast. I think I've been to one in San Francisco and a couple in LA. So I'm looking forward to next year's in Long Beach.
Definitely. Thank you. Micah Hayes.
Okay. Jess, are we just doing a general introduction or also about how our connection with the conventions in the past? I don't know.
We're just doing general introductions at this point for those just joining too. Thank you. Yeah. And then we'll get into the share discussion in a little bit.
Got it. Yes. So my name is Micah. I'm on the AES Pacific Northwest Committee, along with Jess. And I'm an audio engineer and a composer. I do location recording and live sound, and have been an educator for a long time, and live in Seattle. And yeah, looking forward to this. I've gone to most of the conventions, I guess, in the last, I don't know, 20 plus years. So it's I did a Long Beach one next year though. Will be kind of interesting. I don't think it's the first time it'll have been there. I don't know. Anyway, but yes. So that's
Great.
it.
Glad you could make it. Thanks, Micah. Sean Murphy.
Hi, Sean Murphy, live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Work in film scoring and orchestra recording world, and a little bit of reinforcement also. And I think the first convention I went to was probably in '66. Seems like it was at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel or something like that. So it'll be interesting to hear what everybody has to say about this one. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for being here. Gary Eichmeyer.
Hi, I'm Gary Eckmeyer in Lakeland, Florida, AES member since the late 80s or so. I presented a paper in '89. I'll be anxious to chat with JJ if possible next time, because I have built a amateur PSR recording gizmo, which is perceptual sound reconstruction idea of JJ's. So I'm trying it out in a local recording of our local symphony, and I have yet to download it and play it in the system, but it's an interesting project. My other thing that I want to talk about is a major article that I have in the Boston Audio Society speaker newsletter. It's about stereophonic sound and such. If you get to read it, it's the third issue of volume 45 of the BAS speaker. And I guess that's about it for now.
All right. Thanks for being here, Gary. Janie Wallach.
Hey there, Janie Wallach in Seattle. I record location audio too. I didn't realize there were so many of us here. Although I probably record different genres than most everybody else, because it seems like everybody or most of the people who have introduced themselves so far seem to be more classically focused, and I pretty much record everything else. If anyone in the Seattle area is ever interested in learning more about what I do or coming out to a show with me, please chat with me privately in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Janie.
Hey, Jess.
Yeah.
Rob Marr posted in the chat. Rob Marr here, Bozeman, Montana. Sorry to not have a microphone set up. I joined the AES in 1985. I'm an AES fellow, teach electrical engineering at Montana State University. I've been convention papers chair quite a few times, and I'm an associate technical editor and deputy editor in chief of the AES Journal. Thanks to PNW for putting this evening together.
Ah, great. Thanks for being here, Rob. Thanks, Dan. And I see Steve Wilkins also put in the chat, professional musician, performed public for decades, degree in psychology, worked in acoustics research, doing such things as articulation testing for accuracy of pilot to tower headset communications and simulated noise of aircraft cabin. Very cool. Also complete social survey of SeaTac Airport and defended Port of Seattle when the Highline School District sued Port over noise, AES member. Great. Thank you, Steve, for being here.
I meant to add that I'm also an AES member and committee member for Pacific Northwest.
Thank you, Janie. Great. Let's see. Bob Smith.
Hi, I'm Bob Smith, an AES member and AES PNW Committee. And I've done acoustic research and worked for major medical device companies for over half a century, and so I'm now retired. I'm still doing some research. I'm in my own lab here, and so I get on some technical topics every once in a while and present them, time permitting.
Great. Good to see you, Bob. Thank you. Bill Gelhaus.
Outside of Philadelphia, I'm a lifer, doing what interests me most, which is being the archivist for the American Theater Organ Society and handling their archives right now.
Great. Thank you for being here. Let's see. Dave Quick.
I'm an AES member, and I'm a musician, a programmer, and studio owner.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Dave.
Okay.
Yep. And it looks like we had Rod Evenson join us. Hi, Rod.
Yep, I'm here. Rod Evenson, longtime member of the AES, a life member, and in electronics engineering mostly. I do recording, however, in the Portland, Oregon area, and much of my work ends up on all classical FM 89.9 radio, and just sent the Claremont Trio appeared last Sunday, and that's online for anyone who's interested. And I have another project coming up this coming week, Takosh String Quartet with a bandoneon player. And as to when that will be aired, I don't know, but if it comes off okay, it will be. So we shall
Very
see.
cool. Yeah, best of luck with that, Rod. That sounds like a good adventure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bill Ray.
Well, hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Let's see, I'm a retired audio electronics design engineer from Dolby Laboratories. And I joined the AES before you were born, Jess. I've been a member for about 40 years. And I'm currently co-chair of the AES Historical Committee, working with Brad McCoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I think, did Bill freeze? Oh, nope, you're there. Okay, good. Just want to make sure and see if you had anything else. Great. John Chester.
Hi there. I'm in Cambridge, Maryland. Joined the AES in 1970, currently a life member. I'm an audio design engineer, and I've spent about the last 20 years repairing and upgrading tape recorders for people who are doing archival tape transfers. And I currently maintain a studio that does plangent tape transfers.
Very cool. Glad you can make it. Thanks for being here. And I think we've gotten to everybody except Gary Louie, which I would like to now
Dan
kind
go?
of. Oh, Dan. Yes, sorry. Please, Dan.
Okay, and we got a call on Mark Gander again to see if he's back.
Okay.
So I'm a life member also. I've been committee chair of the Pacific Northwest section. This is my 10th year and final year, and that's been a really good thing for me. And I do PA work still for concerts and enjoy that, but I'm here in New York after the convention and I'm enjoying that also. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for being bringing all your gifts and skills tonight and knowledge. Looks like Mark Gander unmuted. Mark, are you there to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Gander. I spent over 40 years at JBL, various vice presidential positions for the professional division. I started with them in 1976 when I joined the AES in 1972 and went to my first convention in New York at the Waldorf Astoria when they were back in there. And so I'm pleased to monitor the Northwest section and see what people think. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for being here. So next, Gary Louie.
Thanks, Jess. Should I just do my intro and then segue into my presentation, or is there something else after the introductions here?
I think that would be a good call. So Gary's going to introduce himself, and then he's going to lead us into the most recent convention discussion. So take it away, Gary.
And let's have people turn off their videos so that we're concentrating on the speaker here. Thank you. So I am a AES Life member, as a member since 1980. And I'm currently the secretary of the Pacific Northwest section. I've held several jobs in the PNW section, including chair and vice chair and so on. And I'm also chair of the AES Tellers Committee for the whole AES, and that is the job that just oversees the mechanics of the annual elections for the AES president and vice presidents of the regions and so on. So I am fairly recently retired from many decades as the recording person at the University of Washington in Seattle. And let's see, what else? Anyone else? And I guess I will go to the convention stuff here. So let me do the share thing. And to a lot of people, the convention is just the exhibits. Apparently, they don't recall that there's papers and workshops and things. And it was a little different this year. So just to remind people, the website of the AES Show in New York, which doesn't seem to mention anything about audio engineering or a society, that you can go to the site and still tells you exactly what this stuff is, including the program. And I would just point out that, yes, you can look and see what all the presentations were if you wanted to, including picking certain categories and so on. So let's see, yeah, I did have the program. But if you do want to look at the exhibits, yeah, they got exhibits. So here was the map, and that's still on the site. And there's also a section where we did the oral history project recordings right in this little room. No, this is the one level. That's where all the presentations for papers and workshops are. And you can see our exhibitor list of 113, which is quite a bit lower than previous years. And, you know, I tried to curate my narrative of this year's convention, so it wasn't just like slides of my summer vacation. And I see that the AES on their Flickr page did post hundreds and hundreds of photos. So if you wanted to see 664 photos from the official AES photographer from day one, plus all these other days, 577 from day two. Bet they are on the AES Flickr page. And I can post these links if it's inconvenient to look at those. There is a news release done by the marketing person for the AES about how they describe the show. And of course, they usually try to put a pretty good spin on that. And it was co-located again with the National Association of Broadcasters, the NAB. And they call it the NAB show. So I guess that's maybe why we just call ours the AES show. So their exhibits area is a little bigger than ours, probably twice the size. And yeah, they had 263 exhibitors by their count. But let me just share the little photo story I had here, if I can find my photos. And here we go. So I'm told it looks better on the screen if I make it as big as possible. And I hope that looks as good as I can make it here.
It actually got smaller that time.
It got smaller?
Yeah.
Okay, I have no explanation. Zoom, sometimes it has a mind of its own. So this is straight off the AES website. The registration fees, and you can make a note of that because I think we were thinking we would do the past, present, and future of AES conventions, and I think we're just going to start with the present, but we will go to the past, and we do have some historical data on where past conventions were and how much registration fees have been through the years on at least a few conventions. So I will just notice that life members of the AES do not have to pay to register for AES conventions. So even if I'd registered early, I did not have to spend the $450 or the $650 if you registered on site. And I see Paul Colvin has arrived. Someone let him in. Okay. So my badge, and this year, single point badges rather than the two that go around your neck, plus some stickers that they handed out. And they did have some little ribbons for your badges this year. So I did entitled to wear the Western Region ribbon at the bottom of the badge, as well as a committee chair. So Dan and I actually arrived a day before, or 2 days before, depending upon how you count, the start of the convention, because we were going to set up this stuff for his oral history project stuff. And they gave us a room, 2D01, to do this down this hallway. Important to say John Chester was part of this too. And John Chester and Bob Auld. And they have rules at the Javits Convention Center. And anyone who hasn't been there, it's a gigantic convention center able to hold thousands, tens of thousands of multiple conventions at one time if you wanted to. But
before the actual shows begin, they lay this blue walkways down there to protect the floor from people rolling their exhibits into the hall. And, you know, if you've got a thing that's only on 2 wheels, or you've got a box that has 4 wheels on it, you can roll it into your exhibit by hand if you're an exhibitor. Down the blue walkway, which we got to do for the oral history project stuff. But man, there's a guard there, and if you try to roll in a cart with 4 wheels, you are doomed. But architecture fans, the Javits Center has got what they call their Crystal Palace or something like that, because it's all glassed in birdcage structure. So it's kind of an interesting architectural thing. So 2D01, yeah, we spent all Monday trying to set this stuff up. They gave us an empty room like this with a huge amount of air conditioning noise blowing in from the ceiling there, which we had to figure out what to do. So there's one of the subjects being interviewed, Dominic, in the way in the background, then Dan, Bob Alt, and John Chester trying to figure out the setup. So I think Dan's going to talk more about doing the oral history project, and we've got some more photos for that. So the convention place is pretty gigantic if you want to fill it. So this is what the big hangar doors looked like for the AES side of the exhibits. And registration, I think attendance was a little low. They quoted almost 6,000, which historically, which we'll go through, is definitely on the lower side. No lines. And I do not recall which day this was, probably Tuesday. And a couple of New York Section student volunteers or recent graduates that I asked to pose. So, and another one for the architectural fans. It's kind of an interesting place. It's big. And on the NAB side, they had the space next door. We could walk between the exhibits. I do not think the NAB guys had anything like papers, although they had some rooms on their exhibit floor where they were apparently giving some presentations. And the infamous Starbucks in the lobby, which I think has the highest priced coffee I've ever seen anywhere, including airports. But for some reason, people line up and still pay. A little more of the architecture of the convention center here. And then on the exhibits, so I only have a few of the exhibits because they're not that interesting to look at, I don't think. The Avid booth, there's our friend David Satz at the Shep's booth, and some other various booths, people who have never been to a convention, exhibits, trade show type thing. Well, we can answer your questions about that. So you can see Atom Audio and Focusrite had a little booth, and the John Lennon educational tour bus was parked there. You could tour it if you wanted. It's been there several times, I think. I would hate to think what they paid to show that on the show floor. The Sanken booth, the Sound Devices booth. The Telefunken guys brought their VW Bug again. About time for them to get the new ID Buzz van, maybe. And some other general booths on the show floor here. So they do have an opening ceremonies because, years and years ago, they used to have a banquet, a formal banquet where they'd have like a dance band and a dinner, and they'd give the awards at that. And I didn't note exactly when they stopped doing that, and they had a general opening ceremony at the convention. But they had Ebony Smith, who's a producer for, I think, is it Atlantic Records now? Yeah, that's what the sign says. Producer and engineer at Atlantic Records. So she gave the keynote address, and then afterwards you're supposed to schmooze with all the AES officers and VPs that are in attendance. So here's Micah. Micah's with us tonight, and he was at the convention. So one aspect that Dan has pointed out about conventions is it's maybe not just a thing to go see the exhibits and see the hardware, but to see old contacts, professional contacts, meet new ones, go out to lunch, go out to dinner, go see the town, tour a famous city a little if you want. So Micah and I went out to have lunch, and I had the lox bagel and an egg cream. And as I always tell everyone, there's no eggs and no cream in an egg cream. Later that day, I think this is Wednesday, the Ampex dinner, and there's our friend Brad McCoy, who's here tonight, myself on the far right, and Scott Dorsey's friend Ren is straight in the center, and Scott Dorsey with the gray hair, and Bing Lin, who's the Chinese distributor for Great River and Josephson microphones, I guess. I did not go search in old photos to look for older Ampex dinners, but we have had higher numbers. Later that night, they hired space in a big tavern bar thing down on 8th Avenue for the president's reception, which was preceded by the DEI reception in the same place up till 9:30, and then it was the president's reception. Since I was at the Ampex dinner, I didn't go to the DEI reception. And for those who can't remember, that's the diversity, equity, and inclusion reception. So at the president's reception, yeah, you can get a few things to eat and get received by the president. So there's our president, Leslie. Now, back to the convention. It was co-located with the NAB, and we could see all of their exhibits. There's a big hallway you walk through between our exhibits and their exhibits. So if you go through there, yeah, they had a lot more exhibitors. They had a lot more activity going on there. They had roughly, they had over twice the number of exhibitors, and it kind of looked like it too. So keep that in mind. I think we can say more about that later. So I just took a couple of photos of some of the exhibits, mostly a lot of them camera and lighting oriented for TV people. And yeah, here's this one guy. He had a real espresso machine working there. I didn't bother to go get one. So they do have papers and presentations, workshops, and you go down the escalators down to the 1 area, the 1 floor, 1E meeting rooms. And there's a guy who's supposed to be guarding. He looks at your badge to see if you've got the right credentials to get in here. And I am not going to describe every presentation, but I just popped my head and took a few photos to show people what it's like to sit in one of these. It's not that exciting, and usually everyone complains about the sound being provided being poor, which is, they could say is ironic since it's the audio convention, but this one had fairly good attendance. And this was a bunch of AES officers, actually. There's the president-elect on the far left, Gary Gottlieb, and the current president, Leslie. Someone help me?
Gaston Bird.
Gaston Bird, right. As well as some other AES officers describing how you can help by volunteering. I think it was aimed mostly at a student crowd. The Sound Girls had this one. It seems to be pretty well attended. And some other workshops. Looks like Andrew Sheps I see in the panel up at the front. You can kind of see him. And at least one paper that I went to, and the only photo I took was his ending where he says, well, you can get the info here. So this one, not so well attended. I don't remember exactly which one this was, but they did put it in a little bigger room. And that's the end of my slides for this one here.
So I go home, but taxiing out. For some reason, we're not going anywhere, but it's 174 degrees outside the plane. So I don't know how they get that. I'd be curious to know, but I didn't ask anyone. So that's what I have for the current show. And Jess, was there, what's the next step here?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. That next, if you are able to share your video walkthroughs, and we've got
Right.
the exhibit tours to share. And folks, feel free to unmute if you see an exhibit or somebody, or you just want to do a general discussion as we go through these walkthroughs. The AES exhibit walkthrough video is about 7 minutes, and then we'll just spend a couple minutes on NAB. And
Right.
after
Okay.
that, yeah.
So I think the point is, I just held my phone up and walked through the entire AES exhibit. And then I also did it to the NAB exhibit, but it's not very exciting to watch, and some people get a little motion sick. But we're just going to turn the sound down, at least for the AES exhibit side. And if anyone sees an exhibit, they should just yell out and say, yeah, those guys weren't there, or I remember something. So we're actually looking for commentary while this plays, because I don't think it's that exciting to just watch. So let me make sure I'm sharing sound and that I can control the video. So are you seeing the...
We're seeing a sea of people's names there. Now we're seeing the video.
Yep, but
Okay.
we're seeing your background still too.
Yeah, okay, I've shared an incorrect thing here. So let me stop the share and try to share just the video.
While you're doing that, I'd like to make a comment about your pictures of the seminar rooms and how astonishing it was to see how low they had the speakers set for the room. You want the speakers to be high in order to not blast the people in front, but still get to the back. And that was surprising.
It's been a long time since anybody was willing to put a truss in one of those meeting rooms.
Well, you don't need a truss. Those were 7 or 8 foot, or maybe even 6 foot speaker stands,
well,
and they make them up to 10 or 12.
We used to do trusses.
Well, you could, but that's way more money. But it doesn't
Of
cost
course.
a penny more to have tall stands as opposed to short stands.
Yeah, they used to also use the trusses for some lighting effects too, whereas now they seem to put the screen right underneath the brightest ceiling light that they can. So we should have the video up now.
Yep. Looks good.
And I'm going to turn the sound down. We're going to play it. It's just under 8 minutes, but we're looking for a commentary, like on anything you see or anything you want to say about the convention. So I think the plan was to play this whole 8-minute one, but to not play the entire NAB one, which is something like 14 minutes. But we could show a few frames of it or something like that.
Go ahead and press play.
Are we ready? Okay, let's go.
So we're walking in from the main hall, obviously, to
Yeah,
the main
pardon
lobby.
my finger there. I'm trying to get past the guards and making sure he didn't care if I was shooting video or not. But the guard didn't even look at me.
Well, there were probably another guard on the right. There were 2 when I went through.
And they ran out of water in the water coolers all the time, and I complained.
So it's cool. You can hear the convention hall. Puts us there.
See if there's any famous people doing something weird like eating.
Famous people eat too.
Did they have food available at the exhibit floor?
Yeah, there was some fast food stands in the back of the hall.
A little pricey, but it was there.
Yeah.
And Triad selling transformers.
Again, audio transformers.
Yes.
Is there a hot new item or topic?
Hot new item?
Immersive, for sure.
Yeah.
Not sure how new that is.
Which day was this,
I saw
Gary?
you went pretty past the booth named immersive.
Yes.
He's making a D to A converter. It's supposed to have much better low-level resolution than anything previous.
I don't recall which day this was. I'd have to look at the timestamp, which I can't really do right now. But for people who haven't been to a convention before, this is what happens. You get stuck behind slow-walking guys. But this is not so bad. This is not very crowded, particularly. The NAB side, a little more crowded.
Well, and the show floor did get a little more crowded on the second and part of the third day.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's time dependent and whether the show's on a weekend or not. There's some complaints that if it's not on a weekend, people can't leave work and come to the show, which is a valid point, I suppose.
But they stopped doing weekend shows some time ago because they pay, my understanding from not very deep is that they had to pay overtime on the weekends and they don't during the week. So there's that.
I did
I hate
see.
to tell folks this, but most of my work is on weekends, so I prefer a midweek show when I can get it.
Yeah, same.
Good point. Well, oh,
So I see a lack of giant brand name devices hanging from the ceiling, which probably costs a pretty penny to have them installed. But they have quite a few of those over in the NAB side because they have big corporate exhibitors there.
There's also a lack of t-shirts being thrown out and other cool swag for people to grab.
Yeah, I would agree, Dan. The swag was down.
Yeah.
It was good at the NAB side.
Oh, really?
Your friend Lou at the History Museum there.
All right.
I do not know what booth space cost now.
I happened to talk to Rick Chin's cousin yesterday. He owns a New York Post production studio, and the subject of the AES convention came up, and he said that he was a potential exhibitor, but the booth cost from this year to last year was double.
Wow.
Exactly double. And he might have gone for the price last year, but he's sure not going to do it for the price this year. And you've got to assume that if that is in fact true, and I have no way of proving that or knowing it, that would influence the numbers.
And probably vice versa. They probably raised the price
Yeah.
because they didn't have enough exhibitors.
Yeah.
Yeah. One significant missing was Neumann, who've had a booth, immersive room in past years, and they did not do that.
And I haven't seen my alma mater Dolby yet.
Not there.
Yep.
They were always big exhibitors.
Yeah. Now they just sell software, I think. There's no hardware to sell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's hardware.
Well, my understanding is that the Neumann people were off-site somewhere.
That's correct. Yep.
Norman was off-site with merging, and they had demo room for each of those a few blocks away.
Oh, there's Andrew Sheps again.
And
Who's
that's
the guy in
Buddy Judge is right in front of you from Apple.
Ah.
With the hat.
You don't see a lot of audiophiles or dressed to the hilt babes, do you?
No. No, and Gary didn't point at it, I think, in this video, but Meyer Sound had a booth that was a normal booth, not an extravaganza like they used to have. I got to see them for a
They
little
used to,
bit
they used to
once.
do a demo room as well.
Yeah,
So that's the AES booth there. You're just going by. The society had a booth with our new management team manning it.
They were there last year too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now I'm lost and I'm just walking around, I think.
Yeah, last year Michelle was manning it. This year Emily, our new executive director, was in the booth most of the time.
It's our friend David Satz again. I tried to get him to wave, but he ignored me. Because it's about the 5th time I think I walked by him.
Michael
he
Ashton.
did a lot of talking. Go ahead.
Oh, Michael Ashton has a comment in the chat. Sounds like he had a booth and paid basically the same as last year. So, Michael, what booth did you have? Yeah.
So I had a booth for my business, Ashton Research. I was kind of way in the back. Yeah, it was pretty similar pricing to last year. It may have been like $100 more expensive. I didn't notice that it doubled, but I don't know. I may not be getting as good prices as everybody else. But otherwise, I don't know.
And I may not be giving you good information either. It's completely unvetted.
I was curious as to whether the Nagra people had any presence there in conjunction with anybody else.
Nope.
Okay.
Are there any sound demo rooms in other areas of the halls?
No, not that I know of, except on that corner of that exhibit space. Genelec had a room there, I think.
Yeah, and that Genelec room was an immersive room, and it included demonstrations from Morton Lindbergh and Jim Anderson and George Massenberg
and Chuck Ainley, I think.
Chuck Ainley, I believe. So some of the big names did do demos of their recordings in that. I went to one that was Bob Marley from Analog to Atmos, which was a pretty interesting presentation.
I thought there was one or two down on the second level down or something. If you didn't know where they were, you weren't going to find them.
There was Toa had a demo
on
the first floor behind the escalators.
Yeah.
That was the only one down there I know of. There were two rooms in that same area, plus a papers room behind the escalators. So do we want to look at a few frames of the NAB side or not?
Yeah, let's take a look just for a couple minutes, just to get a feel.
Okay, let's see.
I'm told they're selling lots of transmitters these days.
Yeah, for context, before the CES became the largest trade show in the world, back in the 90s, back when I went to these shows, the NAB was considered, NAB show, especially in Vegas, was considered the largest trade show in the world, if I recall. So they've always been kind of big. Back then, there'd be multiple trucks on the floor and lines and lines of satellite and production trucks out of the parking lot.
So NAB also does a spring show in Las Vegas, I believe. So
okay, so they did this one with us, but yeah, the Vegas one was gigantic. It was, it took, you couldn't do it in a day if you tried. Too much stuff, especially if you knew anybody.
Yeah, I've heard some people also say that they like the NAM show to exhibit at, and they can sell at the NAM show.
Yeah, and NAB had several shows. I mean, they had an NAB radio show that was in San Francisco at Moscone for a while. So they broke it out.
So, yeah, no one really wants to watch the whole 14 minutes here, but it was a much bigger exhibit area. There's the guy with the espresso machine. Looks like he's running low on coffee beans, too.
Is this where the food is? I didn't see it in the other video.
They had like a hot dog stand or something in the back of the AES exhibit area and some stands in the back of the NAB exhibit area. I did not buy anything from those.
Passed by it earlier.
So
one thing that surprised me, there were a couple exhibitors that actually had booths, both the AES and the NAB sides, like the NAB photo.
Like Blackmagic Design, they had a teeny booth at the AES side, and they had this booth at the NAB side.
Nice.
So okay, so now you get the idea. It's a gigantic walk around thing, and there's, let's see, what did NAB report? 12,200 people registered for theirs, and nearly 6,000 they claim registered for the AES side. So we're significantly smaller.
Yeah, well, so is NAB. Even though it's bigger than AES was, it's still a shadow of what it used to be.
Yes, as business evolves, as the internet takes over some things, apparently, and the industry
whole business
changes.
of having theaters on the exhibit floor, that never used to happen when the exhibit floor was full of exhibitors, but now that it's not full of exhibitors, they've decided that they might as well use that instead of renting rooms for presentations.
Oh, look, there's Arthur Stop. You worked at Sigma Sound?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know Dan has a significant amount to share about the oral history project he worked on, and a lot of very interesting historical facts and figures about the AES conventions since they started in 1948. And we've uncovered some facts and figures that are very interesting, I think. Should we go to that, or Jess, is there something else we need to do here?
Well,
I think we're seeing enough of the NAB floor here.
Yeah, I think we're good on the tours. Thank you so much for those video walkthroughs, Gary, though. That was really cool to bring us there and share. Before we get into the history, I do want to make sure we talk about this most recent convention, and anyone who's here who attended and wants to share a bit more of their experience specifically. And we can do, depending on how many people want to share, please raise your hand and I will go down the list and we'll put a timer on for 3 minutes, and that way we can get to everybody. If that's works for you, Dan, as well, and then
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, great.
Anybody got anything
Anyone who attended this year?
that you want to share?
All right, Michael, love to hear.
Yeah, so I guess I already mentioned I did have a booth this year, second year in a row. Last year was my first booth at AES and my first booth ever at a major trade show for my own business. The thing that really stood out for me the most at this particular show was that I've done a number of trade shows over the past year. This one was by far the slowest. On Thursday, I had probably a 2 or 3 hour stretch where almost nobody came by. I have to check my notes and see if that's correct, but typically I would average a lot more people than that. I certainly did last year. I mean, it was nonstop last year. That said, I made some valuable contacts. I felt like the show ultimately was a good thing to do, and it was helpful. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised. There did seem to be a decline in traffic, and I'm not surprised that it diminished. I was sorry I didn't get to go to some of the talks. It's tough to do that when you're manning a booth basically by yourself, but looked like there were some really interesting things going on. I'm looking forward to reviewing some more of that stuff. I felt like the show was reasonably well put together. I guess I'm not sure why the attendance would have been much lower. I'm not sure what that indicates about the industry, but I am looking forward to the one in Long Beach, and I'm planning to go. So.
Great. I'm glad you had a good experience. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Brad McCoy.
Hi, thank you, Jess. Just a couple of things. The video that Gary showed was pretty interesting to see the floor, but the second day, at least my experience was that it was actually pretty full. It wasn't elbow to elbow, but it was pretty close. So it varied by time of day and over the 3 days. Also, the main opening ceremony and the keynote were in an area right off the show floor, which was a little weird. It wasn't a closed-in room, but they offered headphones for people to wear so they could hear. And I don't know, Gary, if you captured that at all or not, but that area was used for several big programs. And the headphones were really necessary because there was a little bleeding out of the noise from the show floor. I would like to put a plug in for the fact that the overall numbers were down, but the archiving and historical track was definitely up. We had 14 programs related to archiving and historical, which is way more than has ever been done before. And the credit, I think, Jessica Thompson. I was the track chair along with Jessica, and Jessica did a lot of great work. So it was really cool to see. They weren't big numbers. Archiving never is. Historical never is a huge turnout. But number one, I should have started off with, and most important in my mind, is the oral history interviews that Dan led, but also that Gary and John and Bob Ald helped with. So thank you so much to them because it was amazing. The list of people that Dan was able to interview is pretty astounding, and I look forward to Dan reviewing that. There also was the usual connection with the NARIS, with the Recording Academy. The P&E wing had some representation. Maureen Droney was floating around. They had some meetings. They released a major document. If I can turn my camera on for 1 second, I want to show it to you. This is called Delivery Recommendations for Recorded Music Projects. And the final version of this was just released at the show. So that's important. And I see I'm just about out of time. So thank you, Jess, for giving me a minute here. And it was a real pleasure being there. A lot of really good exchanges. Networking, as always, is just the biggest part. And it was fun to see everybody.
Are you getting the cue music? Okay. Was that just for me? I heard
heard
some
it.
music
That
there.
was
Okay,
cool.
good. Okay. Roddy Wilson.
Well, I had a question. Did anyone attend any of the off-site exhibits, such as the Neumann merging Sennheiser program or whatever they had there? I was kind of curious about that. I'm a merging technologies user, and they said they were introducing Pyramix 15, but it ain't out on the website yet. So I'm just sort of wondering where that ended up as well.
They claim December.
December, thank you.
Yeah, and Pyramix 15 is a lot more like Pro Tools than it's ever been before.
That's interesting to note. Okay.
Also, I would point out that Independent Audio did have a booth on the floor where merging was represented.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Anybody see anything from that or have any comments beyond what Sean mentioned?
Yeah, I saw Dom. Do you know Dom from merging? He was on the floor for a while, and
Okay.
Dennis Gaines was there.
Yes. I
So
would have expected Dennis, so.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, on the Neumann side, they were mainly showing an immersive speaker array, playing some tracks, but you could steer the conversation to microphones if you wanted to. They were at first reluctant, but later talked about it more liberally. So,
Okay.
in terms of what's coming up microphone wise.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both.
Great. Thank you. Great question. Anyone else who attended this year want to share a bit about their experience? Going once, going twice. All right. I want to hand it over to Dan Mortensen to share more on the oral history project from this year.
All right, thank you. Some background is that in 2020, I got put in charge of the oral history project by Bill Ray, who's here. And I'm going to be forever grateful for that opportunity because it's been a complete blast to talk to people about their lives and their work and their thoughts about how to do what they did, how they chose to do what they did, and the factors that kind of steered them into it. The project had been kind of dormant since about 2014 or 15 in 2020, and it took a while to get up to speed to figure out what the hell to do because I'm not a professional historian or a professional interviewer or anything like that. But as of right now, I've done 42 interviews for the project, of which not one is online yet. And there's a number of reasons for that, but they've been a total blast. And I'll share this year with you who we talked to. And here's the schedule. And I will also thank Brad McCoy for giving me a list of people, of suggestions of people to interview. And most of these people are from that, but I threw in some others as well. Generally speaking, I divided each day into 4 2-hour segments. And because of other people's planning commitments, some of them were only able to do 1 hour. So I've noted that on this schedule here. On Tuesday, Chuck could only do 1 hour. And Susan Rogers, who wrote a recent interesting book about, she's into scientific research, but she used to be Prince's sound engineer. And she talked about the complete lack of balance in life balance, being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4.5 years. But she only had an hour also. And then Chuck Ainlay, who is a noted mixer in Nashville, we had a great time in the first hour, and I invited him back for to do another hour after Susan because I had an open space there. Yeah.
Dan, I'd love to do the editing of the 2 Beaslaw interviews and the Richard Hess one, please.
Okay, let's talk about that later.
Yeah.
So after Chuck's second one, Dominic, who was I know is a maintenance guy from the Battery Studios in New York, but who worked in the Brill Building in a studio that started off as one studio and wound up taking up like 16 or 18 rooms in the Brill building doing different types of audio, like voiceovers and post-production and all kinds of stuff. And hearing about that was fascinating. And then Wednesday, we started off with Sean, who's here today, and he's the only one here. You may recall that he did an incredible meeting for us, and I think it was March or April, about his work with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And we had a delightful time too, as far as I was concerned. Sean, I don't know if you want to talk about what it was like being on the other end of the project there.
Well, it was conversational.
Yeah.
It was, you know, I think it rambled a bit sometimes, but some editing will help that. But it was just a kind of a wander through years of work in this business, and it was an interesting talk. It was fun.
It was really great. And thank you again for doing that. And all of these were conversational and probably rambling. Elliot, who followed you, talked about his work with Steely Dan over the many years. And when he was starting off, getting thrown in jail with 4 black guys who were in the band that he was touring with because they were going 35 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. And the fine was $25 per mile. No, it was $75 per mile over the legal limit, and they didn't have anywhere near that kind of money. So they were thrown into 2 cells for 5 days, and he was in one cell and the black guys were in the other cell because they weren't going to mix races, obviously, there. And what a powerful experience that had to have been. And we had a great time. And Cheryl Pavelski runs a record company called Omnivore that puts out all kinds of music. And she talked about how she came to love all kinds of music when she was a kid and how that influenced her life and work. Matt Kerr is a moderator of the live audio board that I've been participating in for 30 years, which is an online live sound discussion group. And he also works for Goldman Sachs as their technical person for meetings like this that they have all day, every day in Manhattan here, but from their people all over the world. And then Thursday, Kazuhiko Kawahara is from Japan, and he only had an hour to talk with us, but it was, he wrote me later how meaningful it was for him to be able to participate in an English-only interview. And he was anxious about his English, but I pointed out to him that his English is vastly superior to my Japanese, and that I appreciated him making the effort and taking the time to talk. David Bialik is a broadcast engineer, primarily audio broadcast, but he's been super involved in the AES planning committees and facilities committees for the New York conventions for a long time. And that was a fascinating talk too. And so is Wisla. He's from Poland, and we share part of my ethnic background is Polish. And it was fun hearing his life story being in Poland forever. And he was an AES president also. And we've started a project of these oral history interviews to interview specifically AES presidents to talk about their terms in office and the kind of problems that came up and how they approached handling them. And his talk was so fascinating, I completely forgot about the presidential thing. So the names below that are in parentheses are interviews that I've set up to be after the convention on Zoom. And John Storick was scheduled for the last interview. He was actually the first one that agreed to participate, and he was the last one. He wanted that last slot. And then he wrote me that morning that his schedule had precluded him from being with us for more than half an hour. And he didn't show up right away. And at quarter after, I told John and Gary, and I guess Bob wasn't there. So I told John and Gary, we're going to can it because 15-minute interview wouldn't be worth it. And he showed up about 4:20 and was bummed. And we've talked several times. He was bummed that he couldn't be part of this, although he was in one before. And if you ever get a chance, if you're a member, you can go online and see the oral history interviews. If you search for, if you go to browse and then filter by oral history, you can see an interview with him in 2002 with Paul Gallo, where they're sitting in Electric Lady studio, where John responded to an ad in the Village Voice saying carpenters needed to work for free to help build a recording studio. And he went in and did that. And he wound up designing the studio, basically. And not even basically, he designed the studio and all the acoustics of it. And that was his first project. And he's now a super famous acoustician with a company that has offices all over the world. And Electric Lady was his first, and he talked to Paul about that. And if you get a chance, that's a fascinating interview. Then these other interviews that are scheduled for the future are Abe Jacob, who is one of the leading, if not the leading, Broadway sound person, designer, Broadway sound designers. And he's done all kinds of other stuff in his career also. And he lives in Arizona and wasn't going to be at the convention, but Henry Cohen put me in contact with him, and we've set up something for November. And Bob McCarthy also was not able to do an interview, but he travels the world now EQing PAs and doing more than EQ. EQ is just a tiny part of it, but the design of them and the implementation and acoustic correction of them. And John and Helen Meyer from Meyer Sound. I want to hear Helen talk about stuff. And Richard Hess has agreed to do something once his life settles down a little bit. And Jan Pedersen is in Denmark and was a AES president. And that was my AES experience. And this was so mentally draining every day that I chose not to go out and hang out with people at night, which is really the best part of the convention. I have many fond memories of the 18 or so conventions that I've been to, of going out with people and having great audio conversations with people who share my interest in, and maybe even they have a different interest in audio, but we're all kind of interested in the same thing and learning from them, and then usually having something to contribute as well, and having a great dinner in New York. And that's an important part of the convention that I completely missed out on, except for having dinner every night with Gary and John and talking with them, which was also wonderful.
Dan,
yes,
you might want to add David Robinson, past AES president.
Okay, can you give me contact information? Because I looked up as many as I could beforehand to invite them, and an astonishing number were not coming to the convention. So
yeah, I can do that.
If you could do that, that would be swell. And I realized, Bill, that I had to come up with a list of presidents to know who the hell actually was a president. And I could not find that in the world. And so I went through journals and stuff and found names, and then did my best to note those who had already been interviewed for the Oral History Project and to note those who weren't. And that was my oral history project at the AES 2024.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan, for sharing all that. And thanks for doing what you do for that effort. That's a lot. And
It's a joy. It's an
Yeah.
absolute joy. And this group of interviewees was remarkably easy for me to do because, in part, because Gary and John and Bob staffed the technical side of it, the whole convention, which has only been partially true for me once before. At the AVAR conferences that I've done, I'm doing everything. And John especially just did an incredible job bringing the stuff up from Maryland and setting it up and deciding how it should be set it up and how it's going to work the best. And it was really a treat.
Looking forward to checking them out some more. And
if you want to see a picture of that, I think we saw one briefly earlier, but I can show
Oh,
you
yeah,
a
please.
picture of the setup made out of our, at this point, some of it 20-year-old equipment.
I have several photos as well if you need them.
Well, I mean, that's my shot of the setup.
So we had two cameras.
Two cameras, which were Dan's cameras, Dan's microphones, because we used to just use lavalier microphones, which seemed to work in the past, but when we tried them on people this time around, we ended up with people doing all kinds of fidgeting and hitting the microphone and knocking it off their clothes, and they just pay no attention to it. So
you have a good shot of the duct tape in the ceiling?
Oh, you can see the duct tape over the air conditioning vents if you look up right over here, yes.
Yeah, we didn't focus close up, but that was a real important thing that John suggested, and it worked decently well. It moved the airflow from those two over to the far corner of the room, but it was still noisy. So it's still going to need processing, but it was way better.
And yes, you could do that lighting job now with nice little LED lights, but 20 years ago, we didn't have nice little LED lights, and now we don't have any money to buy them, so there you go.
And the AES provided us with the curtain and 3 stanchions there, and we wound up putting all of there were 6 curtain segments, and we wound up putting them all on the curtain behind there and used the 3rd pole coming out at sort of a right angle on the right. And John had these packing blankets that we put over that to get a little less room reflection on that side. And you can just barely see on the left side that there was another packing blanket over there on some stands that he brought with him. So that was great. And point out, you brought the TV that's behind my head there that has a picture of Dominic on it and a switcher so that he could choose between cameras what the view is to more precisely see the headroom, etc.
Since we have 2 cameras, so we can cut between the 2 cameras, I like to see what that cut looks like. And it makes a difference where I am the camera. So.
And the recording was done in camera of the video, and we piped audio into each camera with the interviewee on one track and me on the other. But the actual audio recording was done on a Zoom that Bob Auld brought for us.
So there you go.
That looks amazing. Thanks so much, you guys, for sharing and explaining a bit more in detail. Nice work. Seriously, that's not easy to work with a noisy, bright room like that. So,
well, and any kind of room in a convention center, just like any office building, the acoustics, what acoustics? There are none.
Yeah. Yep. Well, there were some.
Yeah, they were just
mostly
bad.
horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a few
but the padding
blankets,
helped.
The padding does help.
Yeah.
And I've done the noise reduction on the shotgun tracks, and it comes out adequately.
That's great. And here it is empty So they had a whole bunch of chairs and those tables. And we put a table over by the door for the releases for them to sign, authorizing that for us to do this, and put John's stuff on the table. Got the big table in the back right there. And that was Bob Ald also, I think. And we used the chairs, put the chairs to good use. And we're in there close to 8 hours a day. And it was a blast.
Yeah, but
Nice.
it's too bad you couldn't even just have dinner with people or something.
Well, I could have, but I didn't want to deplete my next day.
Yeah, I could totally see
And
that.
I did have dinner with Bob and Gary and John, which
Okay.
was nice.
And
That's cool.
I can testify that Dan was pretty well brain dead by the end of the day. So
I'm not
Every day.
surprised.
And also before each day, because I had a show on Saturday that I left at noon and got home at 11 from, and Gary picked me up at 3:30 in the morning to go to the airplane. And then we flew, and I had problems with my Airbnb beforehand and during that first day, which was exciting. And then we set up Monday, and then we were into it on Tuesday. So
Just what
that
you needed.
contributed to my brain deadness, but I think it's still lingering, actually.
Not surprised.
Well, you're on vacation. It's okay.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah. So thank you everyone for sharing about this year's convention.
We should read Rob's comment.
See.
I'll find it. This year, the convention was midweek. Sometimes it has straddled a weekend, and that seemed to create more foot traffic for the trade show. Yeah, for sure. For the paper technical sessions and workshops, the day of the week don't really matter. Yeah, that's a good point. Those are all good points.
So as a segue, in 2025, the locations will be in Warsaw in the spring and Long Beach in the fall. So that's Warsaw, Poland, and Long Beach, California.
You want the dates? You want the dates?
Sure. I didn't have them at the time. Do they have them? Is it posted now?
Not officially, but well, we can release the Long Beach dates at least. October 18th through 21st in Long Beach.
There you go.
Yeah, that's official. Warsaw, I believe they announced it at the opening ceremonies at the convention, but I don't see it on the website. But it's in May.
I've got those, Gary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you release it?
Forget this baloney about releasing stuff. Yeah, they announced it, so it's released as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, May 24th through 26th.
Yeah, it's Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the 24th, 25th, 26th in Poland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Gary, for also letting us know about the Long Beach dates, because they forgot to put those up on the screen.
Yeah.
Is that over a weekend in Long Beach or?
I haven't looked.
Okay. Well, what were they again, Gary? I want to make sure I have them written down here. Could you say them again?
Yeah, let's see. Long Beach, October 18 through 21, 2025.
That actually is over a weekend. It's a Saturday through Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Jess, if you don't mind my just saying for a second, I think AES owes a deep debt to the people who did these oral history interviews, to Dan, to John, to Bob, and to Gary. What Dan hasn't said is that he did this work, and John hasn't said, and Gary hasn't said, and Bob, who isn't here, hasn't said, they did this as a volunteer. And that's an amazing contribution to AES and to the idea of what an oral history is and passing knowledge on to the future generations. You know, bringing the stuff, setting it up all, and then paying to stay, et cetera, is an incredible contribution in my mind. And I Jess, thank you for suggesting how important that is. And I can only second that. And I think we all owe all of them a really huge gratitude of thank you.
And or Joel for starting it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Well, of course. Yeah.
Here, here. I'm so glad Dan has totally embraced the volunteer job, huge volunteer job in continuing the oral histories along with John Chester. It's been incredible.
It's an honor. It's an honor to talk to these folks and have them be willing to spend a couple hours with me. It's
Well,
awesome.
we're all grateful, Dan. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Gary's got a hand up. Gary Eichmeyer.
How will these be viewable? What sort of medium or site or something?
They will be ultimately on the AES live website, and there are a zillion videos there now. They are only viewable by members of some sort, so they're behind a paywall. I hope we will talk about that.
AES members?
AES
members.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to be
We're all
logged
have
in
to
as
be.
an AES member to see them.
Yes.
And at the moment, they're a little hard to find.
Yes.
And one of these days, we'll actually have the ability to edit the AES Historical Committee site again, and then maybe we can do something about organizing them better.
Yes.
Do you have a list of who was interviewed?
I do, but there is not one that you can see. Are you an AES member?
Yes.
Okay, you can log in to through the member portal and go to AES Live. And when you go browse by subject, there are filters that you can choose to filter the results. And if you scroll through, you will see one filter that says oral history. And if you click on that, you'll see around 100 videos in no order that I can tell. Well, actually, I take that back. The newest ones are first, and the oldest ones seem to be farther in. You can also see excerpts on YouTube. The AES has a site there, but they're only 2 minutes. And so I don't think you get the flavor of what people said. But you can get the full thing of the ones that were done before 2015 by going there now as a member and sorting through.
If you're not logged in as a member on the video site, you only get a preview.
That's right. See 2 minutes worth. Bill?
We have a new historical committee website maintenance volunteer, so he'll be getting up to speed on how to upload all the zillions of Dan's videos to the site eventually when things settle down.
That reminds me to ask, they're still videoing all of the convention presentations, aren't they?
Yeah, and you can see that. Well, all of them, I'm not sure, but they are videoing something, and you can see excerpts of lots of videos or all of lots of videos if you hunt around. I found videos that we made for the COVID one in 2020 that were there and previously unfindable. So you can find stuff.
So Dan, I know you barely got out of that room, but the programs that were in a separate part of the building, there were mostly 3 staff of the Javits in each room. One was actually manning a camera, one doing video PA and recording, and then various numbers of volunteers helping manage people flow. Almost all the programs were recorded this year. I know of at least one that was selectively. New York Public Library did a program about a John Coltrane issue that was fantastic, but they specifically requested it not be recorded because of copyright issues. And there may have been others that were not recorded for that reason, but otherwise they all were. And I just want to mention one program in particular that was really amazing. And I wish Dan and John and Bob and Gary could have gotten to it, but it was Jim Anderson presenting some of the shorts that he did. Jim Anderson, a past president of AES, was on sabbatical a few years ago, and he spent most of his sabbatical selecting gems out of some big interviews. And he basically did the history of AES through his videos, starting with Pickering all the way through Ray Dolby and Bob Ludwig and lots of others. And it was a fantastic hour of that really laid the groundwork of what AES is about. You know, a fantastic show that I hope will be available on the website eventually for everybody to see.
All right, thanks, Brad. Yeah, I got out for 45 minutes, I think, during the
Yeah, I know.
convention.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was fine. That was what I was there to do.
Yeah.
So it
You
was
did it
fine.
well.
Thanks.
Oh,
There's some
that
good comments in the chat here, and I want to remind people that if you want to save the chat before we end, you should go to the three little dots that are down where you type in chat, and you can save to your computer, and that'll probably be in the documents in a folder called Zoom.
The three dots now on my version are above the chat area.
Okay, good. They're there somewhere.
Right. So this brings us to our next section of our meeting tonight, which is the past AES conventions. And historically, they've been places where the AES committee does business, and ideas are shared, innovations are developed, and people come together to discuss all things audio. And Gary and Dan took a deep dive and came up with some treasures. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dan to share a bit more.
Okay, thanks, Jess. And I just sent you all a file of the PDF of the spreadsheet that we did, and you can look it over at your leisure. But I'm going to scroll through some parts of it now, and the parts that I'm going to scroll through are identified in that spreadsheet by a yellow bar on the left side there around the convention number. So all the conventions are numbered 1 through whatever. And it's a little weird at the beginning, which we'll look at, but this last one would have been the 157th, I believe, in the series, although you won't find that number in any of the official documents either. So
Dan?
on this, yes, Gary.
The news release article on the website by the AES for this convention did identify it as the 157th.
Oh, excellent. Okay, I had not seen that anywhere before. Good. Okay, so I'm starting at the top here at 0, which is the very first meeting of the AES of any sort, which took place at the RCA Victor Recording Studios on East 24th in 1948 in February in New York. And I think the top line, the top numbers or top labels are self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, I can answer that. The actual first convention of the AES was in October of 1949 in New York at the Hotel New Yorker. And there was a co-located audio fair showing lots of stereo stuff and phonographic playback. Remember, the LP was introduced right around this time. And that was big news compared to the 78s and cylinders before that.
You sure it was stereo stuff?
No, I'm not sure. Stereo was quite a bit later, I guess. Sorry about that. Edit that out, Gary, please, of the video.
Of course, there was the 45 RPM disc too that came in competition with Columbia's LP.
Yeah. So there were a few more conventions in New York in the subsequent years. And then in 1953, there was the first West Coast convention. And you'll see that it's out of sequence. The New York ones are hard numbers, and the West Coast ones are start at 1. And that was the first one was in Los Angeles at the Alexandria Hotel. And I'll call your attention to the fact that starting this early, the AES was doing a February convention on the West Coast and an October convention on the East Coast. And that seems like a lot for a new organization, but by God, they had a lot of motivated people involved in volunteering to do all this work, and they did it. And I'll also say that the impetus for doing this spreadsheet is that you cannot find this information anywhere. We had to search through journals, and Gary looked through other audio magazines to find out where the West Coast locations were on these first 4. But you are seeing the only document that has this information that exists, as far as I know. And maybe somebody has it someplace in the AES.
I would bet on it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to point out that in 1954, and somehow I need to scroll to the right. There we go. I put comments way over on the right. This was the earliest dues that I found for a year. Member was $7.50 a year, and this was a calendar year, not another year. So they had a discount if you joined after June or April or something. And you only paid for that year, and then you started over the next year. So $7.50, $6, and $3 for students. So we'll look at that over time too.
Now, bear in mind that $7.50 was worth a lot more then, but still.
Yeah, I didn't bother to look, or I didn't have time to look and see what the inflation has been, but I would guess it's 8 or 10%, 8 or 10 times or 11 times by now from 54.
I'm guessing.
Okay, and I'm just going to skip ahead here, and we're going to go to the 12th AES convention. And the thing that's noticeable about this is over on the right-hand side, they did a dues increase, and they identified fellows as different members. And Rob, I'm not sure what the difference between a fellow and a member is. I know that a fellow has a significant increase in social standing and service compared to a regular person. But they charge $10 to those people as well as members, $8 for associates, and $5 for students. So, and I'm not able to look in the chat. So if Rob replied, then maybe somebody can read that at some point. So we're going to scroll quite a ways down, and you can scroll on your own speed on other occasions. And in 1969, the 37th convention, that was the first one to be at the New York Hilton. But the next one wasn't going to be until number 74, quite a bit later. But the Hilton was the first place I went to a convention.
And by the way, the inflation calculator says 1954, $7.50 is now worth $87.91.
Sweet. Okay. So that's about 11 times, 12 times. Okay, good. So in 1970, they announced that the Hilton was going to be the site of it when they announced it in December, January. But then by the time it actually happened, they were back at the Hotel New Yorker. And you'll see by this chart that the locations jumped around a bit over time. And I'll have a comment about that later. I'm not going to name them all out now. So in 1971, there was the first European convention, first one outside the United States, which they called the Central Europe Convention. And that was in Cologne. Then on number 43 in 1972 was the first Waldorf Astoria convention, Waldorf Astoria Hotel here in New York. And I'm going to keep scrolling down until we get to number 68, which is 66, sorry. That's the 1980 convention, which was the first one Gary went to. And Gary, being the archivist and librarian that he is, had all of this information about the on-site registration cost, $30 for members, $5 for students, and $40 for non-members. And the attendance that year in Los Angeles was 6,500. And we're not clear if this is the complete and total attendance, if this is absolutely everybody, how they pick these numbers. There were 185 exhibits. And Gary got these, I think, from the journal, but also from information that he found where he found the names of all the exhibitors and counted them up. So that's where those numbers come from. Let's see here. 72 was the first year without any New York convention. So they had always been in New York every year, but in 72 or 82, they had it at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim, and there was no New York convention. So them announcing that there would be no Javits next year was shocking, but part of the reason I wanted to do this project was to see how unusual that is. And it turns out it's not that unusual for there to be no New York convention. Okay.
Dan?
Yes.
So
please.
I remember pretty clearly that they went from the both coasts to a single coast. It's just a overload for everybody at cost, and there was a lot of negative feedback from the vendors who had to pack up all this stuff, because then they were, that was a lot of freight to get into those, the tape decks and mixing consoles, and everybody setting up and doing that.
Right.
The year became too much of a burden. So that's when they went to the alternating coasts.
Okay. And 2 conventions a year seemed intense to organize to me, but they did it. And there's drawbacks no matter what you do, Okay, so that's that one. Then in convention 74 was the first regular one at the Hilton. So now we're back at the New York Hilton, and they'll be there for a while. And there was 8,086 people there and 199 vendors. And then there's just a few more here that I want to highlight, and you can look on your own. You can see the cost has gone up for convention at convention 63, 83, 93, 83. I'm looking on a tiny screen for my eyes, and this is weird. And then in convention 95, in 1993, that was the first convention at the Javits Center, and 17,000, almost 18,000 people showed up with 351 vendors. And that was a jump in time. I was at that one. I was at all these New York ones after they started being at the Hilton. And that was fun. Then in going to keep going here in 107th convention in 1999 at the Javits, they hit 20,000 attendance, and that's the highest attendance that we've had. And there was 400 vendors at that, which was cool. And then scrolling down, we can see some Moscone Conventions Center in San Francisco.
You missed the peak of attendance there in 2007.
Oh, did I? Oh, whoops. I
Yep,
didn't
right
look.
there.
Okay, sorry, that was the peak, not 20,000. Thanks, Gary. Also at the Javits. So now they're alternating coasts, as Matthew pointed out. This year they're in New York. The next year they're in San Francisco. The next year they're back in New York, etc.
I recall someone commenting that we were trying to alternate coasts with SMPTE. I can't remember personally, but if SMPTE was on the east, we'd be on the west and vice versa.
Okay, and then a convention 141 in 2016 was the last West Coast convention until this next one in 2025. After that, they went to New York every year. And 143 was, shoot, I made a note about that. Is that a note over here? Oh, that was the first co-located NAB convention with the AES. That's in 2017. And through this year, yes.
Dan, when Ray Dolby was president of the AES, he reestablished the bouncing between East and West.
Okay, great. Do you remember what year that was?
I
could tell you. I could tell you because I have a chart. Well, let's get through this first. We're almost through here. And then I put these red ones where they were online ones. I worked on 2020 and parts of another one. And we went back to New York in 2022. There was also an online one, and we couldn't find details about either of those, I think. So go figure. And then here we are in 2024, and we just finished. And here you can see the on-site registration of 650 for members, 130 for students, and 735 for non-members. So there you go.
Attendance quoted in the AES article is nearly 6,000.
Right.
You know, Dan, I mentioned to you, I'm surprised it's not on the website, but there was a European convention in The Hague in Netherlands because I attended it, and I think it was 2022, which
it would have had to have been because there was no spring convention.
Yeah, it was the spring convention of 22 was in The Hague.
Yeah,
and
I could not find anything about that.
And I isn't that wild that it wouldn't be
I looked
on...
after you said that.
Yeah.
I remember that happening, but there you go.
So there you go. Yeah, who knows how complete all these records are.
Yeah, well, I know they're not.
Yeah.
It was a struggle. I'm not going to begin to tell you how much time I spent on this, and Gary did a lot too, but this was a really long project last week to get this put together, as sketchy as it is. So now you all have it.
That'll be really great to upload to the website.
Absolutely.
And Rob has a couple comments in the chat as well regarding the fellow, saying yes, just a professional recognition for being a fellow. Yep, dues are same as regular membership. And Rob also said there was a span when LA Convention Center was being renovated. And that's when Moscone in San Francisco was alternating with New York. And he liked the San Francisco
Oh.
venue. So
Yeah, that was neat.
mhm. And then one more, 2001 in New York was right after 9/11, which
Yes.
I know Benny, remember. The date was shifted a month late because no one could travel, and Javits was initially used for the recovery crews.
And as a morgue. Do you guys who were at the 2001 convention want to talk about that? Because that was a unique experience. The pile was still smoldering and things were.
That was actually my first AES. So I had just I just graduated college and then was working at the New World Symphony in Miami, and they sent me up. And like, I think if I remember, the original AES in that year in 2001 was supposed to be like October or something, right? It was earlier, and they pushed it back, obviously. And I went, yeah, and I remember going, and yeah, that was my introduction. And I had a cousin actually who I stayed with, my cousin O'Malley, who I ended up living with later, who was downtown when like it was attacked. She was like in one of those buildings that was collapsing. She was one of the people like running away from the smoke and the debris and all that stuff. And so when I came, she was like, "Hey, you should go visit. You should go look at the pit." They all called it like the pit, and I was like, "Okay." And so I went down there, and it was like, it really was like a big. It was still smoking, yeah, and it was crazy because I remember going, and they had pushed it back to like November, I think, right? So,
Right.
Last couple
I think it was a
days
couple of
in
months.
November and 1st of December, first couple days, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds right. Because it was definitely winter at that point. But like, yeah, and so it was just starting, the sun was just starting to set, and there was this huge line of people like in New York, like sort of processing, like silent. It was silent. It was like, it was crazy. It was like one of the only times in New York where you're just like quiet. And then you kind of slowly walked by this pit, and then you could see it, and it was just, yeah, it was like, you think like debris would just be like debris or whatever, but it was like filing cabinets and like pictures and coat racks and like no personal things, So, but it was definitely still smoking. And then now, yeah, it's right on the site where the 9/11 memorial now is, like right where that like little pond is. If any of you have been there, it's actually a pretty good museum if you guys are ever there. It's worth checking out.
I
But
had
yeah,
kind of,
that was my first one in New York.
yeah, I had kind of thought that they were not recommending that tourists go down there. So I did not go.
Rob.
Yeah, it's probably true. People were wearing masks even back then. I remember when they were working there, and obviously a lot of people after that was kind of famous for getting lung infections and stuff. But yeah, I definitely went down there. But it was yeah, definitely something I won't forget.
Rob says in the chat, many exhibitors canceled, so the show was very intimate and sorrowful. And he did go down to Ground Zero too. Wow.
Did anyone else do that? Dan, you mentioned it. Did you go down there too, the Ground Zero?
I've been there since I didn't come to that convention. I had tickets to come on September 14th and chose not to make things more difficult for people. And then I didn't want to come. That was a stunning experience for someone so far away, because I'd been up to the top of the World Trade Center a number of times with my kids and family, and seeing it go was as stunning as it was for anybody else.
Likewise, I
There-
used to work there.
Yeah.
It really hit me.
There's an intense movie you can watch that's a documentary of these two French brothers who were following a fireman around. It's called 9/11, and they were the first ones on the scene. That their fire truck was the first one on the scene, and the guy that they were in the truck with, the captain, became the de facto captain of the de facto head of the rescue, because the first one apparently does that. And they were in it when it fell down, when they both fell down. And they had camera. had cameras going. One guy was in it and the other one was back at the firehouse, worried about his brother and wondering if his brother was lost. And it's an intense movie. And if you're familiar with the area, it's like you're suddenly in a desert because of all the dust and you don't know where the hell you are. And they were all experiencing that. And it's profound movie to see what really happened. So on that happy note,
Well,
I wanted to share one more thing about the conventions. I did a summary of the locations and frequency if anyone is interested in that kind of stuff like I am. So in New York, the Javits Center had 18, Hotel New Yorker had 12, Waldorf Astoria had 9, New York Hilton had 7, the Barbizon Plaza, which we haven't brought up today, had 6, and the New York Trade Show building, and I don't even know where that is or what it is or was, had 2, and then there were a few others. And then in LA, the Los Angeles Hilton had 11, the LA Convention Center had 8, the Hollywood Roosevelt, which I think might be the same as the Hilton, I'm not sure. There was one listing I saw that said Hollywood Roosevelt Hilton. So I don't know if that was the same, but it had 7.
I don't think they're the same, Dan. I think they're different.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Good. Alexandria was 4, Ambassador had 3, and Biltmore had 2, and there were a couple other places there as well. And in San Francisco, the only place they had them was the Moscone Center. So there you go. Now you know more than anybody.
Dan, it might be interesting to add the European conventions to that list too, because to see how it moved around and has continued to move around from Paris to London to Berlin to Milan.
Yeah. So they are in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Do you mean in this summary list?
Yeah, in the summary
Okay.
list. It might be interesting to see if it was in Paris several times or
It was.
Berlin
It was
several
in Paris
times.
multiple times.
Yeah.
I will do that.
Okay.
I went
Thanks.
to the Amsterdam convention and it was a lot of fun.
Great.
I know Gary has another document as well as part of this research project that he and Dan undertook that kind of gives a broad strokes picture on some other numbers. If you wouldn't mind sharing, Gary.
I think you mean a couple of old programs that just show this kind of the schedule and the exhibitors. So since I started going in 1980, so I'll start there because I have the program. You will notice that that's the whole program in a table right there. And these were the registration fees that we saw in the spreadsheet. This is where I got that stuff from. So I'm assuming this is on site. I do not recall if they had an early bird price. However, they did list all these papers and they had these different topics that these papers were presented in. So it was basically all papers and exhibitors. And there's a list of exhibitors, many of which are gone forever now, and only a few that we can recognize still. And the Disneyland, and Dan's first, New York Hilton Sheraton Center, this was the entire program for that. Pretty simple technical sessions. Did they introduce workshops? Yeah, there's a couple workshops they introduced. And then for the 119th in 2005, how many exhibitors was it? 400 something? Pretty big list. This is as printed in the journal. Each one of these is clickable, but I have not tried clicking on some of these because I'm afraid they're going to be gone. But a lot of these companies seem to be gone too, and a lot of them just have not exhibited with the AES for a long time. And then something I miss is having the graphic planner for the convention, where you could see at a glance where everything was, and you didn't need to whip out your phone. So it was a 2-page thing, both sides, color, and yeah, I kind of miss that. So there were other things I miss that I don't have any photos of or anything, such as shuttle buses between the hotels and the convention thing. Great if you had a roll around with all your swag and stuff like that, or just didn't want to walk the 5 blocks or 6 blocks or however far your hotel was from the.
Well, a lot of the hotels were much further away then because they didn't have all those hotels close to Javits.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember being at the Roosevelt one year. Which is near Grand Central, and that's quite a hoof to get to Javits from there.
Yeah, and those shuttles were in the West Coast too. I remember taking one in LA that ran from my hotel to the conference site. So it wasn't just on the East Coast. There were a few other services provided that seemed to have gone away.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's just the budget type thing that we have to deal with now as reality. I remember you used to get the AES Daily advertising rag delivered under your hotel room door each morning, as well as available at the convention center, stuff like that. Yeah, they used to have food at the opening ceremonies and things like that. So things we miss back in the good old days.
Paul, did you want to share a comment?
Yeah,
Or?
I said with the shuttle buses, I was on one, got on the bus and sat down, and I was next to Paul Klipsch.
Cool. The great equalizers, transportation, getting there. You see everybody.
That was the kind of thing that amazed me when I first started going to the conventions in 1980, was that all those guys you read about or saw their products of were right there. You know, Paul Klipsch, Ray Dolby, all those guys. Stuff, they were right there. You could talk with them. You might be sitting down in a bus next to them. You could see Paul Klipsch with 2 wristwatches on, one for Arkansas time and one for convention time.
Or he would be in the different papers, and if he didn't like what the presenter was saying, he would just flip his tie over, and on the back side it just said bullshit.
So I never attended any of the formal awards banquets. Did anyone ever go to those? You had to pay extra, and they often seemed to have like a dance band. You were supposed to bring your spouse, and that's when they gave the awards.
Yeah, I did. Go ahead, John.
I never paid to attend one, but I was part of the staff that had to run at least a couple of them. Because of course there had to be a technical staff, you know, if they were doing audio or video at that, there had to be a technical staff there doing it.
So what did you do?
I don't remember. I'm pretty sure we were showing video of something, but I don't remember what it was. Plus, I always
Did you ever
did
do
lighting.
sound?
I always,
Did you ever do sound?
No, I did lighting and
Okay.
projection. There were plenty of people in AES that could do sound or thought they could. I saw no point in competing with them. There were very few people that thought they could do lighting. So,
For the record, John was the house sound engineer, house sound engineer at the Fillmore East for its entire life.
brief life.
And yes, brief life. And to the comment about running into people there, that was the great thing to me about going to the conventions, is that if I had a question about the Countryman DI, I could talk to Carl Countryman, and he would be happy to talk at great length about why he did what he did and how he did what he did. And that was true for everybody. They would have the designers there, and you could talk to them about why the speaker that you bought from them is a half-inch bigger in a side than one other one that you had from them, and or whatever. And it was great to get to talk to people. Because every part of the sound system, any sound system, there's somebody who spent their entire career working on that little part and perfecting it as good as they can get it, ringing it out. And it's fun to get that passion from people and share a little of it. Who here went to the earliest convention? Who here has been going the longest time? Anybody from the Waldorf days?
Oh, well, my earliest one was, I think, 1970, because I know it was Hotel New Yorker.
Okay.
My memory said it was 69, but according to your list, that wasn't the New Yorker, and I know it was the Hotel New Yorker. So it must have been 70 was the first one I went to. That was when I met Irv Joel, who was trying to run a crew of audio engineers and teach them how to put up lights. And I walked in and said, "Oh, lights, do you want some help with those?" And of course the answer was yes. And that continued for many years.
Yeah, Harry Hirsch was around too, wasn't he, John?
I don't remember working with Harry until several decades later, but
okay,
he
maybe
probably
a little
was
later.
around at that point in New York.
Yeah, he helped a little bit. Irv was certainly the driving force behind the oral history interviews, but I know Harry was around working on them as well.
Oh, you're talking about oral history, yes. Well,
Yeah.
Harry was the editor.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, once he'd retired and he decided that he really wasn't ready to give up working on things, he announced that he would be the editor. And so he actually paid his own money to go to a class and get taught video editing.
Yeah.
And edited something over 100 interviews.
Yep, that's correct.
John, those early shows at the New Yorker, did they do anything with Tesla? You know, there's an exhibit about him in the basement now, and there's some remnants of Tesla lived in that building for a long time.
I certainly wasn't aware of any such connection at the time.
Okay.
David Bialik told me about that, and I think there was a meeting of some sort.
Yeah, Dave Bialik arranged tours down to the some of the equipment in the basement of the New Yorker hotel that Tesla set up there.
Cool.
I was going to mention one of my professors at Portland State had met him in passing at some big IEEE thing back in the 1930s and describes him as being a little crazy. But,
Why am I not surprised?
I don't think you can think that far outside the box if you're not.
Not to
At least a
mention
little.
all that sitting around Tesla coils.
Rob's got some great comments in the chat. I've been trying to keep up when I want to share. His first presentation for an AES convention was in New York. Or first presentation for AES convention in New York was the 91st convention in 1991, 31 years ago. Back then, the conventions were held at the New York Hilton Hotel, and paper authors were treated fabulously. No admission charge for authors. paper presentations were a full 30 minutes. There was a professional projection system and stereo PA with a skilled audio technician on hand. And there was a fancy presenter's lounge room with an administrative assistant, photocopier, catered food all day, beverages, etc. It was marvelous for a young professor. Now, decades later, the convention has a relatively small footprint within the huge Javits Center in New York City, and authors are mostly just tolerated rather than actively welcomed. Authors have to pay to attend the convention now, and there's no author's lounge anymore. I understand the financial constraints that have necessitated this demotion, but that doesn't make him any less nostalgic.
Yep.
Well said.
And one of the things we lost when we went to Javits was the fact that we ended up with Javits union guys running the audio.
Yeah.
And very few of them were actually very good at it.
Yeah. Something we've also lost recently is the meetings. You know, there used to be standards committee meetings. There were technical committee meetings. There was even an historical committee meeting, which we have still not been able to get going again and hopefully will. But, you know, that was part of the networking, Dan, that you've been talking about, you know, is that you go to those meetings and you would run into some pretty big names and you could chat with them. And,
Yep.
you know, and the standards discussions were in a room face to face, as I think, my opinion, they still should be, but that's AES brass doesn't see it that way. So,
Yeah, I've seen the effect you describe is that the TC meetings and committee meetings are no longer held live. And I think the rationale is that a lot of people just don't come anymore because it's too expensive. And since the pandemic, they get better attendance on Zoom for business meetings and things like that.
it's a real loss in my book, but that's just me.
Do we have a segue, Jess, to outro us?
Well, I do have one more comment from Rob I want to share. They just popped in the chat. The basement of the New Yorker had a DC generator. The irony is that Nikola Tesla, the proponent of AC power, spent his last days and died in the New Yorker hotel in 1943. He wonders if the DC generator in the basement was still operating then. Part of the
Gosh, I hope not.
folklore. Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing, those batteries are still there.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing because David Bialik took people on a tour of it not long ago.
John can talk about DC sustaining into a surprisingly late time. Do you want to do a little of that? We've talked about that before. Over at the Fillmore, you found DC somewhere or someplace over on the east side.
Basically the entire stage was running on DC at that point, but that wasn't that recently. That was 50 years ago. So, but DC hung on for a long time. And when I was in Brooklyn, in a building in mid 80s, we still had DC coming in from the street, and that was the point when they were going around and putting rectifier units in all the buildings so they could get rid of the street distribution of DC.
What year was that?
That would have been 87, 88.
That's modern times to me.
How could DC have stuck around that long?
Because there were an awful lot of elevators in New York that ran on DC motors.
Yeah, this professor of mine from Portland State, Thomas Killian, was very elderly. That was back in the 1970s, was mentioning New York was on DC well into the 40s. So that was the hangover from Thomas and Edison.
Oh yeah, I mean, I knew people who in the 70s who moved into apartments on the Lower East Side and discovered they only had DC.
Dan, when you interviewed Dave Bialik, did he mention the fact that he got the Empire State Building to light up with AES's colors during the convention?
Yes.
That was an amazing little field trip he took from the
Yes.
convention up to see the antennas up in the in the Empire State
Yeah,
Building.
you all went with him, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And he
Yeah,
had
that sounded incredible.
He had the top of the Empire State in yellow, or I mean in blue and white for AES colors.
He said that took 2 or 3 years to get to happen.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He's persistent.
Yes.
He has friends in high places too.
Yes. Literally.
Literally.
Can anybody beat John Chester for convention attendance before 1970?
I thought somebody said they'd gone to a convention in '66.
Maybe they're not here anymore.
Yeah, we've had a few folks head out. So perhaps.
Okay.
My earliest was 87 to the Disneyland one for one day. So
There's a few more great nuggets of chat from Rob. I just want to share back
Good.
to Gary's appreciation for the printed schedule sheet. He said, is it Han Tendaloo would put that timesheet together, if anyone knows Han. And also mentioned it was a pretty sketchy walking to Javits through Hell's Kitchen back in the day. It's much nicer now with the huge Hudson Yards development. So there's that too, talking about the shuttles back in the day. That was helpful. And then also Ray Dolby was always in the paper sessions and he even asked questions. So that was a neat nugget. Also, there's a IEEE plaque in the New Yorker hotel lobby commemorating the 1929 DC generator. Back to that as well. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Now that they turned it into a better neighborhood, we're leaving. So.
Well, the prices have gone up. I'll point out that, is it this side? Which side? This side is in the picture. That's the far north and east edge of the Hudson Yards, which is kind of across the street and up a little ways from, well, actually it's down the street a little ways, but these buildings are pretty much across the street from the Javits that didn't used to be there. None of those were there 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
And when we first started at Javits, you could find $20 or $25 a day parking in some derelict parking garage down on 30th Street, where there's now high-rise buildings. So.
Yep. And the north end of the High Line terminates on the south end of Javits. So if you ever have heard of the High Line, that's also vastly increased property values along its way from 14th Street or Gansevoort to 34th. I wanted to point out that our convention and NAB didn't take up much of Javits, but the week after we were there, the Comic-Con, the New York Comic-Con was there, and it took up absolutely every square foot of every building of Javits. And there had to, if our convention was 6,000, they had to have closer to 40,000 or more people there. The big loading parking, not parking, but loading area that we unloaded from, which is kind of between 11th Avenue and the building, Javits building, had tents covering it with stuff inside there, and kids and adults and old people in costumes were every place. And I walked up 12th Street or whatever the street is on the backside of Javits, and there was an entire city block with scissor lifts parked next to each other, scissor lifts and cherry pickers parked next to each other for that entire block. They must have had every cherry picker and scissor lift in New York area there. And it was intense, and they can afford that kind of stuff. We are in a downward-ish spiral. We are tinier than the gaming industry, as is pointed out repeatedly. The music scores for the gaming industry are keeping a lot of studios going, recording studios, because they're doing full orchestras for gaming cues. We've had meetings about that, and things change. I wonder if they've talked about going back to the Hotel New York or someplace like that that's smaller.
You know, it's funny, Dan, in my follow-up comments, the AES solicited after the convention, I wrote that in one of my comments was maybe it's time to go back to the hotels because it felt like Javits was too big.
By far. But is our hotels cheaper? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know if there is such a thing as a cheap hotel in New York.
Yeah,
Or not one
what were
you'd
the room
actually
rates?
want to stay in.
What were the room rates for the recommended hotels?
I think they were about 350 and up. Gary, I know
Before taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fairfield, I think John for the single was 355 a night. Which worked out to be 410 or something with taxes. Well,
and...
after fees and taxes and so on. And then
not quite, but close.
Yeah, some of the there were other hotels a little more posh that were a little closer to 400 a night.
Yeah.
So indeed, I did hear comments saying, well, it's cripplingly expensive to go to New York at $400 a night for a room and registration of $650 and so on. Although I did find that airfares historically have gone up and down even over like 20 years. When I looked at my old tickets, 10 years ago, I maybe paid $450 to get from Seattle to New York and back, and this year I had to pay $444. But I've paid far less, and I've paid more, I think.
Yeah. Has anybody looked at what Long Beach is?
No.
Which part of Long Beach? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't know Long Beach. Is it at the convention center?
It's at the convention center. There's a website for the Long Beach Convention Center, but I haven't looked at it, and I don't know what kind of hotels they would be offering us or what.
Yeah.
If they provide us a room for interviews, I'm going to be there.
Well, we're going to do our best to get you one, Dan. I'm going to be screaming and yelling again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your intercession on this one. That was a struggle.
Yeah.
Over a long time. But it came through. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad it worked out, and it shouldn't have been that hard, but hopefully in Long Beach it'll work.
Well, they know about us now.
Yeah.
I'm buddies with Ashley now.
Yeah.
Who was in charge of the facility for MCI, the organization that the AES hires to manage its affairs. So that was good.
Yeah.
We had a question in the chat asking just about saving the chat because it can be a little tricky. It's not super intuitive. So I did download a recent chat and put it's a TXT file. I dropped that in the chat just now for anyone. If that works easier, feel free to download that. And just some final notes to kind of wrap up this portion. As mentioned, we are in a sea of changes. There's a lot of changes happening that are impacting how this convention moves forward, and hopefully we'll continue to find solutions and creative innovations, ways to continue keeping the flame going. And it's just such a special, unique place where we get to come together and celebrate what we love and share. So thank you all for sharing tonight. And we're going to move into just an open share discussion, as we've already kind of started doing, but feel free to share about the convention, anything else related. And just really want to thank everyone for being here tonight. And this is a really special meeting, and I'm happy I was able to be a part of it. So thank you.
Likewise, Jess.
Thank you,
It's great
Jess.
Yeah,
you could be here.
absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
I hear.